I didn't hear the door. I felt it in the floorboards first, the way the old beams sighed when heavy footsteps made a decision for you. The lock slid home on the other side of the guest room, and my heart did that rude thing it does when you realize your future might be decided without you. Outside, the wind dragged its knuckles along the clapboard walls, and the last light of a Vermont afternoon unraveled into blue. "You sign where I put the sticker," she said through the door, voice crisp as an invoice, "or I file the emergency petition by noon and the state makes choices for you." Her name is Lila Avery Chase. She has a watch you can tell the time by from across a room and a smile that doesn't move her eyes. She also has my driver's license, my phone, my keys, and a letter a doctor I used to respect typed with one hand and looked away from while he printed with the other. The letter says, "I am confused." The letter says, "Guardianship." It was addressed to a judge whose clerk I have never met, but who probably drinks her first coffee watching the ridge lines brighten like a bruise healing. The pen on the tray is heavy and expensive. It rolls until it finds the tiny grooves someone gouged into the wood a long time ago. Maybe with a key, maybe with a wedding ring. Maybe that person had a choice. I don't. Not according to the letter. I press my palm to the cold glass of the window, and the Melton presses back. A crow drops into the bare maple like an angry thought. I can hear a truck at the top of the drive, the contractor Lila called to measure the life out of this place. She thinks this house will give her the square footage for her happiness. She thinks I won't have the courage to wait. Here is what I know. I am 64 years old. I have washed the last breath out of a stranger's hair with hands I didn't recognize as my own. I have slept in chairs, kept vigil under fluorescent halos, and learned the exact weight of mercy. I am not confused. I am not alone. And before Lila walks back in here with a new document and a colder smile, I'm going to tell you how a woman like me who did everything right, who took the night shifts and the double shifts, who showed up when it was raining and when it hurt, ended up with a pen on a tray and a future someone else picked out. Then I'm going to tell you how I decided to pick it out myself. My name is Clara Whittemore. Don't worry about the time. In about 90 seconds, she's coming back. If you're still listening by then, you'll understand why I'm not the one who should be afraid of a locked door. I became a nurse the year my mother forgot my birthday. I was 23, standing in her little kitchen in suburban Pittsburgh with a store-bought cake that leaned like a tired building, when she looked at the candles, blinked, and asked if we should freeze half for your brother when he gets out of school. I didn't have a brother. She had what we didn't yet call Alzheimer's. In 1984, we called it getting forgetful, and we tried to patch it with Post-it notes on cabinet doors. Plates, sugar, please don't turn this burner on. I took the first job I could find that would teach my hands to be useful. An east wing of a community hospital in Boston would have me if I could stand on my feet for 12 hours without complaining. I learned everything that matters not from doctors' rounds, but from the night aides who hummed Patsy Cline under their breath, from the respiratory therapist who taught me how to listen under the noise, from the janitor who told me grief was like a hallway in a power outage. You feel your way along until the lights come back on, and then nothing looks the same. Hospital time isn't time. It's an elastic thing that pulls tight between beeps and then snaps when a child laughs in an elevator. I stayed in that flex for 35 years. I learned shortcuts that weren't shortcuts but survival. I developed forearms a tennis coach would envy and a back that read thunderstorm warnings better than an app. I married a good man who loved me enough to know that when the unit called because Mrs. Ramsey's son had finally made it, I was going back in. We had a daughter who grew into a woman who uses the word boundaries the way I used to use shifts. We divorced without drama when we realized we'd pawned our tenderness to pay for our exhaustion. Our daughter, June, stayed in Oregon with her father because her friends were there, and her life had been built without the scaffolding of my schedule. I moved north because I liked the silence of it. My mother died in a room I cleaned myself before I let anyone else in. I buried her on a hill you climb if you love the person you're visiting, and I promised I would never make anyone climb that hill for me while watching the weather. The promise sits in my chest even now, polite, insistent. On a Tuesday in late October, 3 years ago, an agency sent me a short email with a long fee attached. Private care, live-in optional, Parkinson's and a rough heart. Family means well, they always do. I drove up through the moody gold of Route 7 into a town where the diner knows your dog's name and the mechanic knows whose jacket you're wearing by the way the sleeves fit. Gray Bridge, Vermont has a post office with a bulletin board crowded with piano lessons, plow services, and a hand-lettered flyer for a poetry night that was mostly high schoolers reading poems about rivers and girls who didn't love them back. The big house sat on a knuckle of land above a small lake, with a porch built for sitting and a roof built for weather. His name was Thomas Avery. He was 78. Tall, and the way men are tall when they've been that way long enough, the world takes their compromises personally. He had been a professor, economics, then ethics, the combination we never get enough of, in Boston for decades, before he came back to the house his wife, Eliza, had loved. She died before I met him. In the front hall, there was a photograph of her, taken in a winter coat the color of happiness. Some people decorate with things. The Averys decorated with windows. "You're the one," he said when I walked into the den, and I thought it was the tremor in his voice that made my throat get tight. It was the way he looked at me, as if there might be a minute somewhere in the day that neither of us would waste if we had the choice. Parkinson's is a thief that takes what it wants and makes you thank it for leaving you the rest. We learned all the moves: a careful pivot to spare a shoulder, a stretch that looks like prayer but is practical as a wrench, counting pills into the cap like a rosary with instructions. He had humor that surprised you, like a door opening when you thought it was a wall. "If I go down in the bathroom, you leave me there until I reclaim my dignity," he told me the first week, eyes a clear, unruly blue. "Then you call the fire department and tell them to send the tall ones." I made a schedule, then ignored it when the weather changed because bodies don't read calendars. I learned which cup wasn't really a cup, but a souvenir of the summer his daughter killed the car battery because she wanted to listen to the end of a song. I made soups that tasted like the word comfort, and tea the color my father liked when money was tight, and we made it last. I tucked his tremor into a rhythm, like two hands waltzing with the beat only they heard. His daughter, Lila, came up every other weekend in a car that smiled with too many teeth. She wore City, even when she didn't mean to. 2 phones, 1 laugh for each. She would kiss her father's head and then talk to the house manager about gutters while the lake considered itself. She was generous with things that came in boxes and stingy with things that require time. People like that taught me long ago that generosity and love are cousins who don't always speak. The first time she met me, she gave me a gift card to Whole Foods and a smile that didn't make a sound. She said, "We like organic," as if that covered something that splashed. "He's particular." "So am I said, and watched the glance she gave me as if I had used the wrong fork. The weekends were good for him when she was late, and better when she had a cold. He would ask for stories, and I would tell them about the woman who brought a walnut cake to the unit because her husband loved nuts, but they gave him hives. about the janitor who saved 3 lives and told no one because he thought people would make it about God and he felt weird about God. About my daughter's dog, an anxious rescue who cried when trucks shifted gears. Sometimes he would talk about the world and make me believe in it again. Other times he would take my hand when the trimmer had gotten mean and say my name like it was a promise kept. Thomas called me Whitmore, the way you call a person you trust by the name that comes with their spine. On a Wednesday after Thanksgiving, he asked me to write a phone number down on the pad he kept by the radio. Ruth Kaplan, he said. Elder law. Not for me. For later. I wrote the numbers neatly because I still believe you owe respect to what might save you. You're much better at planning for later than most people, I said. Teaching 20-year-olds about compound interest will do that to a man, he said, and we both smiled. Then a week before Christmas, he told me about the trust. He made something that lives longer than me, he said, looking at the lake like it might endorse the idea if it liked the paperwork. It's for scholarships, caregivers, nurses who stayed through 3 managers and a broken budget, a small foundation with a tiny name, no one famous attached, no galas with salmon, just checks that arrive in the mail with a note that says, "We see you." I didn't cry, but I had to hold the kettle with both hands a minute to make it honest. That's good, I said, because the right thing does not require compliments. It requires witnesses. His daughter didn't like paperwork she didn't write. I learned this the day she found the draft of a letter on his desk. She held the paper up like a glove you know isn't yours. "What is this?" she asked him. And his face did the thing Parkinson's faces do when they still want to be the old faces. It pretended nothing had changed. "It's a letter," he said. And for a moment I loved him, in a way that doesn't have a category because it isn't allowed one. "To whom?" she asked, clipped like a hedge. "Is the foundation sending checks?" "To whom," he said with that professor's amusement tugging the edges of his words, "is not the part you're asking. You're asking how much." She made the face people make when you decline to play the game they rigged. "I'm asking to be included," she said. "You are included where you want to be," he said gently. "You did not want to be in the places that smelled like bleach and kindness. That disqualified you for this conversation." She looked at me then, a precise glance. There, that one, the one who doesn't look away. I looked back. He died in March, the kind of March that can't decide if it's winter or a promise. It happened at night, as it often does, when the body thinks no one is watching. His heart was a musician who played one last long, elegant note and then set the instrument down. I have been in rooms when the air changes like that. It always feels like a door closing in a building you thought was weatherproof. I sat with him because I don't believe in administration entering first. I called the number on the corkboard for the on-call called the doctor called the time. That's how we clean up after endings. The next morning, Lila arrived with sunglasses and an entourage of quiet men who knew how to look busy while holding nothing. She cried in the foyer the way television tells you to cry. You dab, you inhale, you ask for water, you won't drink. She hugged me, and there was no person in the hug. "Thank you for everything you did for my father," she said, voice pitched to the staff's ears. "We will never forget it." I believed half of that sentence, the wrong half. 2 days later, an accountant with cufflinks the color of a good bruise called me by my first name like he thought we might be friends if he met me at a club he would never go to. He spoke in a language that sounds like English but is made of clauses built to keep the people who matter in the room and the people who don't matter at reception. Miss Widmore, as you were made aware, there are a number of instruments to be administered. The family needs some time in the residence to grieve privately. We'd love to put you up at the inn in town for a week while things settle." I knew what that sentence was, a friendly relocation disguised as gratitude. "I live over the garage," I said. "My things are there. My life is there." "Precisely," he said, and smiled like a realization had just shaken hands with him. There is a moment in most women's lives when someone who thinks he is being polite hands you a small insult with a napkin. If you accept it graciously, the napkin becomes a contract. If you decline it, a different kind of document appears. I packed my bag. I left my favorite mug on the counter above the dishwasher because I trusted kitchens to keep secrets better than people. And I told myself I would breathe like a person whose breath belonged to her. At the inn, the woman at the desk slid me a key across a wooden counter that had been varnished by hands and years. "No credit card needed," she said, and her smile was the first honest thing I had seen in 2 days. "Mr. Avery used to give us poinsettias for Christmas. You tell me if you need anything, and you can have it. And if you don't tell me, I'll mind my business." Someone knocked on my door that afternoon at 4, and when I opened it, a man in a suit stood there with a folder he didn't want to be holding. "Miss Whitmore," he said, and used the tone cops use when they stop you at a light because your tail light is out. "I'm Dr. Halpern. May I come in?" He had been Thomas's doctor. He'd once told me I was a godsend for keeping a small note on the fridge that said which nights were bad nights and which ones were storms. He'd also gone to medical school with Lila's husband. "I'd prefer the porch," I said, stepping out and shutting the door halfway behind me. The spring wind kept its hands in its pockets and pretended it wasn't listening. He passed me a letter printed on thick paper. It said things about cognitive impairment. It said my decision-making appeared compromised. It said my personal safety might be at risk if I lived alone. It said guardianship and temporary and emergency. It was signed by a man who didn't look up as he typed because he had rehearsed betrayal somewhere that paid better. "You know me," I said, very quietly, because the quiet was mine, and I didn't want to give them the noise, too. "You know I am sharp as a tack and twice as useful. Why would you write this?" He took a breath and didn't use it for truth. "It's standard. It's protective. It doesn't have to mean anything more than oversight for a little while. We want you safe." "Some men," my first nurse preceptor told me on a night when 3 alarms were singing the same bad song, "can't say we want control if you hand them a script. So they say, we want you safe and hope you're tired." "Who asked," I said now, "for this letter?" He looked at his shoes. "The family," he said. "It's better if you cooperate. It will be easier." There are words that taste like pennies in your mouth. That one did. I called the number on the pad by the radio. "Ruth Kaplan," said a voice that sounded like it ate problems for breakfast and asked for more. "Tell me everything." I did. She listened like listening had a salary. She told me what emergency guardianship could be misused to do and what a scissor and a copy machine could cut free. She told me she'd be in Graybridge by morning. They didn't wait for morning. At 11 that night, 2 men from a private security company that puts elder safety on its website picked me up from the inn like I was a package. "We've got orders," they said. "We're to take you to the house for your own protection until tomorrow's hearing." "You can refuse," the night woman at the desk whispered, teeth barely moving, "but I can't promise who the sheriff plays cards with on Fridays." "I'll go," I said. "I'll use their door and my brain." Back at the house, Lila showed me to the guest room with a smile like the receptionist at a dental office right before the root canal. "We need to keep things orderly," she said. "There's been a lot of stress for everyone." "Orderly," I repeated, as if the word were an apple we were going to share. The next morning, my phone was gone. My bag had been unpacked by someone who folded my underwear like it might testify. The window opened only 4 inches because somewhere along the line, an insurance adjuster made a rule and people obeyed it. When the door locked behind her, I swallowed my panic and went fishing. I had a pen in my hand that I didn't sign with because I was busy unscrewing it. Inside, tucked where the spring would have been, there was a battery the size of a truth. It was attached to a tiny camera with a lens like a freckle. People give nurses pens like they're candy. I had invested in one that watched back. I set it on the tray where she had put her fancy pen like a queen setting down a sword. If she'd asked me why I had a camera disguised as a pen, I would have told her the truth. I don't let people narrate my sanity anymore. At noon, the lawyer showed up. Not Ruth. A man in a blue suit whose lapel pin said he took himself very seriously. He sat across from me with a clipboard and a smile that had never waited in line for its turn. "Miss Whittemore," he said, "we're hoping to avoid a formal process. The family wants to support you." I've been in rooms where the word support was poured like warm tar. I let him talk. I let him say transition like it wasn't a shove. I let him say assisted community like he had ever visited one that didn't smell like abandonment and lemon polish. Then I asked for water. He left the room to fetch it himself because people who bring you bad news like to deliver it as if they were bringing muffins. When the door clicked, I touched the side of my eyeglasses and the little light in the corner went from green to red. The glasses weren't a camera. That would be too cute. They were a transmitter. The camera was the pen on the tray, and the transmitter was kissing the pen like a cousin at Christmas. The signal went where it needed to go. The day before Thomas died, he told me a story about the first time he taught a class he wasn't qualified to teach. They needed someone to fill in for Ethics 101, he said. I walked in and told the kids, "I don't know as much as you think I should know. What I do know is this: who benefits, who pays, who gets to decide. Ask those 3 questions and your conscience won't need a map as often." I ask them now, who benefits, who pays, who gets to decide? Not me, not me, not me. Lila came back at 3 with my driver's license in a form with little flags telling me where to put my name. Her perfume reached me before she did. It smelled like a hotel lobby full of good intentions. "Sign there," she said, tapping the page. "This just appoints me to make health decisions with you if you are unable." "Unable," I said, like it might be the name of a town I'd never visit. "What does the judge need to see so he agrees with that word today?" She smiled with small teeth. "This is temporary," she said. "We can avoid the judge entirely if you stop being stubborn." Temporary is a word that can last a lifetime if you hand it your throat. "Tell me something true," I said, looking her in the face. "Say one true sentence about me that isn't flatter and isn't cruel." She blinked, surprised. "You are dependable," she said. "You come when called." I laughed one softly. "You don't hear how that sounds, do you?" Her mouth made a shape most people would call a smile. "We'll figure this out," she said. "I'm on your side." The glasses blinked steady. Somewhere the signal went where it was supposed to go. The universe smelled like wood polish and snow. That night, while the house slept, the kind of sleep money buys, I lay awake and touched the small chain around my neck. On it was a locket the shape of a word I don't believe in. Inside was not a picture, not a hair, but a SIM card I had loaded in town using cash and kindness. The locket had one job: send what the pen saw to a place where the woman who could stop this train was already waiting on the tracks. Her name is Maya Torres. She anchors the evening news for a station that gets snow closings right and cooks segments wrong. She also grew up 3 blocks from me in Pittsburgh and has a mother who once kissed my forehead in a kitchen where the radio was the only thing that worked right. When she picked up the phone yesterday, because the name on the screen said Whitmore, I could hear the city in her hello. "What's wrong?" she said. Not, "How are you?" I told her. She said, "I'm listening." And then record everything. Do not be alone with them without having a witness, even if that witness is a wall. I looked at the wall now. It had a painting of a boat on water that was lying about how calm it was. I didn't have to be alone. The wall worked for me. The house manager, a man named Jonah, with hands like timber and a mind like a ledger, brought me breakfast on a tray at 7. He put the tray down and looked at me with a sadness he didn't bother to hide. "She told me to stand outside the door," he said. "I'm standing outside the door." "How long have you been standing outside doors?" I asked, pouring coffee I didn't want. He said, "Long enough to know when someone deserves to have one opened." And his face did something that made me foul his name under useful. At 9, the lawyer in the blue suit returned with a woman wearing pearls that looked suspicious of their own value. This was the guardian ad litem, which is a fancy way of saying person who decides for you without having to live with the decisions. She asked me questions with her head tilted politely to the left, the way people do when they want to look like permission. "Do you know what day it is?" she asked. "Wednesday," I said. The kind of Wednesday people use as an excuse. She wrote that down. People like her always write resistant to care when what they mean is refuse to be bullied. She toured my mind like a brochure, pausing in rooms she thought were pretty. She asked me who the president was, as if my answer could clean her hands. At 10, the snow began, the way Vermont snow often begins, which is to say, like it had been waiting just out of sight until it could make an entrance. The lake put on its great coat, and the trees put their shoulders up. At noon, Ruth called from the road. "I'm 5 miles out," she said. "The hearing's been bumped, but don't sign anything, not even a delivery receipt. Then, also, you're live." "Live where?" I asked, and she sighed the sigh of a woman who has saved more than one person by being exactly where she said she would be. "Maya has the feed," she said. "That pen of yours sends better pictures than my phone. Keep it on the tray." At 1, Lila came in alone. She shut the door and leaned against it like she was about to confess to a friend she'd borrowed a dress and spilled wine on it. But what she said was this: "You and I could make this easy." "Say the rest of the sentence," I said. "Don't be theatrical," she said, which is what people say when your pain has the audacity to sound like poetry and their greed can't compete. "Say the rest," I said again, because in my experience, the part they wanted to skip is the part that matters. "I filed the petition," she said slowly, like she was reciting a recipe. "I assume temporary guardianship. You move into Maple Ridge Assisted Living in Rutland. We sell the house. We manage the foundation's obligations. We move forward." "We," I said. "We manage. We move." I let the sentence hang there like a wet sheet on the line. "What do I get?" "You get care," she said. "You get a room with a bed someone else made and an activity board with colorful fonts. You get to let go." Of what? I asked. Of pretending, she said, and smiled softly, like she believed the lie was a kindness. It is an old story. Woman with the key tells another woman to hand her the lock and calls it safety. I'll think about it, I told her, and put my hand on the fancy pen like it was a thing I didn't know could save me. That night, the storm came in sideways. Jonah stood in the foyer stamping snow from his boots and swore at the generator under his breath when it hiccuped like a drunk. The lights blinked and then steadied. The house liked to be the one doing the considering. It didn't enjoy being forced. At 8, a car tried the driveway and failed. At 9, it tried again, and there was shouting at the top of the rise where the big maples leans in to listen. At 9:30, the lights went out and the house exhaled, and when the generator kicked in, the hallway took on the red glow of a submarine in an old movie. I was not afraid. Fear is useful until it isn't. Then it's just heavy. Instead, I was something else. Calm like the second hand on a wall clock in a family lawyer's office. Patient like a nurse at 3 a.m. with a patient who wants to talk about a dream that smelt like oranges. The red light made everything look like a warning. Lila and her husband Evan had come alone to avoid the plows. Now they were trapped in a house that knew their names. Their voices bounced down the hallway like tennis balls without an umpire. "I told you to handle the doctor," she hissed. And his answer came back oily, expensive. "I handled him. He handled it." "Then why is Kaplan's Subaru in the drive?" she said. And the silence that followed that question was the first honest silence of the day. I took the pen from the tray and put it in the pocket of my robe. It had done its job. I didn't need it to watch anymore. I needed it to fly. I slid off the bed, opened my door, and stepped into the hallway like a woman who lives there. "Clara," Lila said, trying to smile again, "what are you doing out of your room?" "Stretching my legs," I said. "Old habits, night rounds." "Go back inside," Evan said. "The kind of man who believes he is courteous because he learned to say please when he was 6. The power is out. It's not safe." "Not for me," I said. "No." I walked past them. I was a ghost in their house. I belonged to no one and nothing except my name. The generator room is off the mud room near the back door where the boots sit in a patience any religion would admire. I went there because I wanted to know if the engine that pretended to be a heart could be trusted. Jonah was there with a flashlight in his teeth, hands deep in a panel. He glanced up, saw me, and did not ask why. "Storm knocked a limb across the line," he said around the metal of the light. "We're on diesel and stubbornness." "Good," I said, and the pen in my pocket hummed once. A small affirmation, like a kitten. Behind us, voices rose. "You should have told me about the trust. You should have told me there was a clause." "I didn't know until I looked," she said, and there was a shred of the little girl in there, the one who had wanted to listen to the end of the song and killed the battery. "Who buries a clause like that?" "Someone who expected you to be exactly who you are," he said. "Read it again." I already had. I'd found it the night before after the house manager slid a folder under my door like contraband. The clause said this: "If any family member seeks to appropriate the foundation's funds for personal use, their inheritance is reduced to a stipend enough to fund a 1-bedroom apartment and a sensible car." Thomas had a sense of humor about consequences. "Is this what you want me to see?" Jonah whispered, eyes flicking to the hall. "I want you to hear what they are when they think they're alone," I said. "And I want you to remember it when a judge asks." "Why me?" he said. "Because you keep the lights on," I said. "They only know how to flip switches." We stepped into the hallway, and the house conducted our footsteps like a choir. In the library, books sleeping like children do when they've become furniture, voices doubled. Ruth stood by the bay window, coat still on, hair a halo nobody owed money to. She held 2 folders like weapons that don't draw blood, but in wars. "We can do this civilly, or we can do it the way you like things, loud." Evan laughed once. He said, "Counselor, whatever you think you have." She said, "Stop." And her voice did the thing that makes men who are used to being obeyed become interested in listening. Whatever you think you can hide will be on a screen at 6. What screen? Lila asked, and looked toward the dark television on the wall as if it might flicker with judgment. Channel 7, I said, and stepped into the doorway. Maya's voice found us through the red light, through the generator's throat, through the pride of people who don't get scared properly and confuse that with being brave. Tonight, an exclusive from Graybridge where a caregiver claims she's being forced into guardianship by the family of the man she served. We have recordings. We have the doctor's letter. We have questions. Evan moved first, because men like him do when the world stops agreeing with their confidence. He lunged toward the sideboard where the TV cable snuck toward the outlet, and Ruth beat him there like a woman who grew up with brothers and learned to win. Don't, she said. The generator's temperamental. You tug that, we lose heat. Good, he said. Let it freeze. Let it record, I said, and held up the pen so they could see the tiny light that meant somewhere a woman was doing her job exactly the way she promised she would. You can't, Lila said, and her voice went thin. This is private. This is a crime, Ruth said. Private is for feelings. Crime doesn't get private. Turn it off, Evan said. No, I said. He stepped toward me the way men step toward women when they want to be bigger than their fear. Jonah moved without thinking and put himself between us like a tree that remembered how to be a forest. Back up, he said, and the flashlight beam found Evan's expensive shoes and made them look ridiculous. Everybody stop, Lila said, and for the first time there was something human in her voice. Stop, just stop. Clara, listen to me. You lived here. I know you think this is about money, but it isn't. It's about respect. Respect, I said, and wished Thomas had been there to hear the word treated so carelessly. Say what you mean. You think you understand my father, she said, and the little girl climbed over the woman for a minute and lost. You think because you were there when he broke a glass or when he told a story he never told me that you have some kind of claim. But I knew him when he was not generous, when he told me I was selfish because I wanted to move to New York, when he said no to a summer program because the dates collided with the family trip I didn't want to go on. You met the best of him because there was less of him left to fight you with. I let the snow talk for a second against the window. I met the rest of him, I said. I met the man who had learned he was wrong and was trying to die right. You don't get to decide what that means, she said. Neither do you, I said. He did. He did, and he wrote it down. Ruth put the folder on the desk. Here, she said. Read your father. Lila picked up the paper like it was a dog that might bite and started reading. Her lips moved the way people's lips do when letters have become enemies. Her eyes did not move away for a long time. When she finished, she set the paper down with the hand that had stopped obeying instructions. It's a clause, she said. Clauses can be challenged. By whom? Ruth asked. The daughter who just filed to put his nurse in a facility because she made you feel replaceable? I never, she said, stopped, threw the sentence out, and got another. You were going to sell the house, I said. Don't decorate the truth like a cake and then pretend it isn't sugar. If you've never watched a person consider the possibility that they are the villain in a story they wrote, it looks like a weather report changing from sun to hail. It looks like the jaw working against something it doesn't want to say. It looks like a woman who has always been told she is good, realizing that good is a verb and she has not been conjuring it lately. Leave, she said to Evan, and he did not move. Leave, she said again, and he laughed and did not move. She looked at me. You were never supposed to be this hard. I was never supposed to be this easy, I said. The sheriff arrived at 10 with cheeks red from the walk up the drive. Her name was Elena Pike, and she had the steady patience of a person who has had to talk to people who think their money is map. Maya's camera trucks arrived behind her the way weather arrives after a smell, and I watched from the top of the stairs as the front hall filled with friction and flash. "Miss Whitmore," the sheriff said, looking up at me like I was a person, "you want to step down and tell me what the hell is going on?" "I've been asked to sign my life away," I said. "It turns out I can still hold a pen." She asked for the papers. Ruth had them ready. She asked for the security company's orders. Jonah had those. She asked for the doctor's letter. I handed it to her with a Post-it stuck to the top that read, "Ask him who pays his golf fees." "Cute," she said, but there was respect under it. She asked if I felt safe. I said yes, in this room, in this moment, because you took off your hat when you came inside and you didn't look at my hands for shaking. She asked if I would like to file a complaint. I took a breath and said the word that has rescued exactly as many women as it has exhausted: yes. By morning, the petition had been withdrawn pending further review. By afternoon, the doctor's office had put me on hold long enough for Jesus to return. By evening, Maya had run the first segment with the warning that more would follow, and my name was a hashtag I didn't ask for. By the end of the week, my daughter had called me from Oregon, voice tight, body moving across a different kind of winter. "Mom," she said, "why didn't you say anything?" "Because I didn't want you to fly across a country to fight a fight I was built for," I thought, and didn't say. Instead, I said, "because I thought I could outstubborn a system by myself." "You can," she said, and I laughed, a little ashamed of how proud that made me. I would like to tell you that was the end, that the judge looked at the paper, shook his head, and told Lila in a stern fatherly voice to go stand in a corner and think about what she'd done. That is not how systems work. Systems require hearings. Hearings require nerves. Nerves require stamina. Stamina comes, for women like me, from coffee and rage channeled like a river into a turbine. The courthouse in Bennington has a hallway that smells like pineapple cleaning fluid because someone once spilled something sweeter than a subpoena there, and they never could get it to leave. I wore my best sweater and the scarf my daughter made when she thought she could knit emotions into garments. Ruth wore a suit that said politely, "Absolutely not." The judge had a face that had seen men lie and women tell the truth, and the opposite, and had forgiven neither. He listened. He asked questions with his eyebrows. He read. He called a recess to consider, and probably to ask his clerk how to spell a word he didn't want to misspell. He came back and said the word that matters in a room like that: denied. The emergency guardianship was not granted. My phone was returned with apologies that were written down by no one. The private security company took their caps off and looked at the floor. The doctor sent a letter with the words miscommunication and review in it like talismans. Lila did not look at me because some women are not taught how to make an apology in public. They only know how to hold a grudge. Evan looked at me like a man looks at the patient he cannot bill because she went out of network and got better. There were other hearings. Papers were filed and answered and filed again. The foundation's clause stood up on legs I didn't know paper could have. The house stayed a house and refused to become square footage on a listing. The trust was administered by a woman with a braid thick enough to coil in a drawer and a heart that beat exactly where you could see it. The first scholarship check went out in June. It was addressed to a man named Lewis, who had quit the hospital to take care of his father and thought that meant he had quit mattering. The note said, "We see you." I wrote it. There are things you don't get back. The quiet of believing a doctor's letter is always a good letter. The faith that family is a verb and not a weapon. The idea that a locked door means safety and not a plan. There are things you do get back. Your name, the breath you hold at the window, the way hot coffee tastes when you didn't have to ask permission to make it. Lila was charged months later, not with the crimes that make television good, but with the crimes that actually do the damage. Attempted unlawful restraint, fraudulent petition, undue influence, paper things that cut flesh. People asked me if I wanted to speak at her sentencing, and I said I would rather write a check to the scholarship fund and call it even. I did. It felt like winning an argument with a storm. When Maya asked if I wanted to come on the air in person one evening, I wore the scarf again. On camera, lights make you into a painting you didn't authorize. She sat across from me, and I could smell her mother's kitchen on her, because some smells don't wash out of a person, even when the network buys your dry cleaning. What would you say, she asked, to the women watching who think this couldn't happen to them? I would say it can't until it does, and then you are who you were the entire time, which is to say brave enough to ask 3 questions. Who benefits? Who pays? Who gets to decide? And if the answers don't include your name, stop signing things. Is there anything you regret? She asked. Yes, I said. That I did not ask for witnesses earlier. That I thought quiet was the same thing as dignity. It isn't. Sometimes dignity is loud. The first time I slept in the big house again, not because it was mine, but because it was right, snow fell in slow, honest sheets. Jonah left the generator alone. He had a new baby at home with a name he told me like a secret. I made soup. I stood at the window and watched my breath make little proof clouds that disappeared before anyone could praise them. The pen sits on my dresser now. Sometimes I pick it up and feel its weight and think of the day my name didn't belong to me and how it does again. I do not need a device to make me brave anymore. But I keep it because some tools are talismans too. Do you want to know the thing that still surprises me? It is not that I was almost tucked into a room with a floral bedspread and an activities calendar that lists bingo as an event. It is not that men in suits can turn their coats inside out so quickly the lining is still warm. It is this, that a house can keep faith with the people who loved it better than some people can keep faith with their blood. Houses remember. They sigh when you cross the floor because they want you to know they heard you. I see Thomas sometimes when the light hits the lake in that tricky way that makes you believe in the other side of things. He is not a ghost. He is the part of a good man's choices that keep doing their job after the good man is no longer available for comment. He says my name, Whitmore, in the way that made my spine feel like a pledge. He says, good, not because I beat his daughter in a courtroom, because I did not allow the quiet to eat me. There was one more conversation with Lila. It happened in town, of all places, in front of the library, where the bulletin board finally retired the flyer for poetry night and put up one for a bake sale with cookies that look like the state of Vermont if you squint. She was alone. No car with teeth, no pearls. She looked like a person whose luck had gone into the shop. Clara, she said, and put her hands in her coat, because some people need to hold themselves to speak truth. I didn't know he loved you. I didn't say he loved people. I didn't say love isn't the pie you think it is. I didn't say the line I saved for myself. We could have been allies. What do you want? I asked, because sometimes you have to ask the question so the other person can be honest with themselves, even if they won't be with you. I want to stop thinking about the claws, she said. I want to stop thinking about the night with the red lights. I want my father to be easier. You want your childhood back, I said. We all do. I wanted the house, she said, and laughed once, a sound that had nothing to do with joy. Not because of the square footage, because I wanted to win something that belonged to him, and he gave it to himself. No, I said. He gave it to the versions of himself he hadn't been in time. That is a different kind of generosity. She nodded once at something beyond me. Don't let them write me as a villain. I won't, I said, though I knew by then that stories pick their own adjectives. But you should stop giving them the best sentences. We parted like people who have to share a town and a weather report. I watched her walk to a car that looked like it might be borrowed, and thought about June and her word, boundaries. You teach your children how to love you by how you love yourself. I had failed at that for a while, then I had not. On the night the 4th scholarship check went out, I made a list of the names I would never say on camera and the names I would always say if asked. On the first list, the doctor who typed without looking, the lawyer who smiled like a fence, the man at the private security firm who called later to clarify that his men were only following instructions. On the second list, Ruth, who did not blink when the generator hiccuped. Maya, who held her station's ethics like a plate of cookies and passed them around. Jonah, who stands outside doors and waits for his moment to be a hinge. June, who said boundary like a blessing. My own name went on that second list too. It felt like a little girl in a kitchen in Pittsburgh saying her birthday out loud so she won't forget it. You want to know how it ends. That's fair. People like endings. They hope endings are contracts with beginnings. Often they aren't, but sometimes they are. The house did not sell. The foundation's board met in the dining room where deals used to happen over salmon and now happen over sandwiches that drip onto napkins that become notes. We read applications and cried more than men think professional women do. We wrote checks. We wrote names on envelopes with flourishes because sometimes a flourish is a form of respect. I moved into the caretaker's apartment behind the kitchen because I like the way it smells in the morning when light lays down on old wood like a cat. I keep my mother's tea tin on the counter. I visit the hill where we put her when the road is clear and I don't have to watch the weather. I tell her I did what she would have done if the words had been available to her. She tells me I'm not the only one who remembers how to be a wall. When people write to me now, they ask how to avoid what almost happened. I tell them truthfully, I'm not in the business of guaranteeing futures. I am in the business of naming rooms. In your house, there's one for fear and one for fatigue and one with a door you've been avoiding because someone told you it leads to selfishness. It doesn't. It leads to the yard. Go outside, breathe, ask your questions. If you don't like the answers, don't sign.
Sometimes, late at night, I take the pen apart and put it back together. It reminds me that complicated things can be disassembled and made simple once you understand where the spring is. It reminds me that small lenses see as much as big ones if you put them at the right angle. It reminds me that people who say, "for your own good," are often late to their own appointments. The wind makes its old arguments across the lake, and the house sighs like it learned to forgive. The generator sits quiet, wounded pride healed and waiting for the next storm. The boat in the painting looks like it could finally take the risk of choppy water. If you're still listening, if you're sitting at a kitchen table with a letter you don't like the sound of and a pen that feels heavier than it should, I want to tell you something I wish someone had said to me earlier. There is nothing wrong with demanding an audience for your courage. Do not be noble in silence when your story needs witnesses. Call them. The neighbor with hands like timber. The lawyer who knows no is a full sentence. The friend whose voice can cut a hole in a storm. Then pick up your pen, write your name, and do not forget it.
The day I turned 65, the lake was a mirror and I didn't trust it. I prefer water that tells you what it is. Maya drove up with a camera no one turned on. She brought a cake that leaned like a tired building, and we laughed until our coffees went cold. June sent a video of her dog deciding the couch was his boundary, and who were we to judge? Ruth called from a courthouse where that morning a woman I will never meet got to keep her own keys. We cut the cake with a knife that had belonged to Eliza. We ate on the porch. We toasted a man who wrote a clause that turned out to be a love letter to the person he had alas learned to be. We toasted a house that refused to become a number. We toasted my mother, who forgot my birthday once and gave me the kind of memory that can keep a promise. At dusk, I walked down to the edge of the water and put my feet into the cold like I was brave. I said the names out loud so the lake could have them. When I said mine, I said it twice. Back in the kitchen, the kettle clicked off on its own. The pen lay on the dresser, sleeping. The generator didn't even think about upstaging the stars. Someone will try again. Someone always does. The system is a machine that expects women to get tired first. I am tired. I am also trained for fatigue. I know how to nap sitting up and then get back to work. I know where the coffee filters live. When the knock comes, and it will, in someone else's house if not mine, I'll answer with what I've learned standing in rooms where people wanted to draw the map and put me in the corner. My voice has furniture now. It sits where I tell it. It does not apologize for taking up space. It welcomes the right guests. It doesn't pour tea for thieves. Out on the lake, a loon calls, because that's what loons do when you need reminding. I don't know what he's saying. I know how it sounds, like a story that is not done making itself useful. So I write this down for you, and for the woman who will watch the 6 o'clock news in a chair with a knit blanket over her knees and think, that could be me. And for the man with the pen someone else placed on a tray and told him to sign and be quiet. I write it for the judge who will see through the letter because his clerk drinks coffee from a mug that says, do not confuse my silence with agreement. I write it for the house managers who decide when the doors are actually locked and who they are locked for. I write it for my daughter who says boundary and means love, and for the girl I was in that Pittsburgh kitchen with a crooked cake and a mother who could not find me on the map anymore.
Who benefits? Who pays? Who gets to decide? I do. And so if you ever find yourself in a room with a pen on a tray and someone smiling the smile they learned from a brochure, look at the window. Put your hand on the glass. Feel the mountain press back. Remember the woman in Vermont who didn't sign. Remember that courage is a thing you can keep in your pocket if you fold it right. Then open the door, even if they told you it was locked. Walk out. Keep walking until you can hear your name said by your own mouth like it belongs to you. It does.